Okay, picture this. A high-tech shield. Maybe, I don't know, lasers from space. Something designed to stop every single missile attack coming your way. It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
It's definitely in that category of really ambitious, almost fantastical defense ideas that people have been talking about for decades.
Right. Well, today we're doing a deep dive into a plan that kind of brings some of those ideas back to the table. It's being called the Golden Dome Missile Defense Shield.
Mm-hmm. And we're focusing entirely on one source for this, an article from The Economist, which really digs into this whole ambitious concept.
Exactly. So our mission here is just to unpack what that article says about the plan. You know, where did it come from? Why is it being discussed again now? What's the tech involved?
And what about the big promises being made? And maybe most importantly, what the analysis in the article actually says about, the reality, the costs, the feasibility, the implications, all based only on this one source.
Yeah, what does the Economist piece tell us? Is it, as the article title asks, fool's gold or gold standard? Let's get into it.
Okay, so to really get the Golden Dome idea today, we kind of have to rewind a bit, back to the 1980s.
Ah, right. Ronald Reagan, SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative. Or, as pretty much everyone called it, Star Wars.
That's the one. And the Economist article, it actually describes that original SDI concept as a madcap scheme.
Madcap, yeah.
Yeah.
Because back then, it just sounded so out there. What was the original idea? What did it involve?
Well, for the time, it was incredibly ambitious. The basic idea, as the article lays it out, was to put, thousands of interceptor satellites up in orbit.
Thousands, wow.
Yeah, thousands, ready to basically shoot down enemy missiles almost right after they launched from space.
A space-based defense against missiles launched from Earth, which, as the article notes, just wasn't really doable back then, technologically speaking. And the whole idea eventually just fizzled out.
It pretty much did, yeah. But the core concept, well, the article says it's been resuscitated now by Donald Trump, and he's given it this name, Golden Dome.
Okay, the Golden Dome. And the claims being made about this version, according to the article, they sound pretty bold. What does the Economist report he's actually said about it?
Well, the article mentions claims about the total cost. Apparently, Mr. Trump has said it would be around $175 billion.
$175 billion, okay. For a nationwide shield.
Mm-hmm. And the timeline claim is also pretty striking. He's apparently said it could be finished in just 2 to 3 years.
2 to 3 years. That's incredibly fast for something like this.
Yeah.
And what about protection? How effective is it supposed to be?
The article quotes him claiming protection close to 100%. And it also mentions him calling it super technology. Add in the claim, nobody else has it.
Okay, so close to 100%, super technology, 2 years, $175 billion. Those are the claims reported in the source. Definitely echoes that 80s ambition we were talking about. But then the article makes this really interesting point that the idea itself isn't quite as outlandish today as it was back then. What's changed? Why is it maybe a little more plausible now?
Well, the big difference, and the article really emphasizes this, is technology, especially space technology.
Okay, like what specifically?
The huge one is launch costs. Getting things into orbit is just dramatically cheaper than it used to be. The article specifically points to companies like, Elon Musk's SpaceX, really driving down those costs.
Right, so just the basic act of putting the infrastructure, the satellites, up there is less of a barrier.
Exactly. It's far more economical now. And it's not just the launch cost. The source also mentions that the actual hardware you'd need, things like the sensors to track missiles from orbit, the little miniature computers to guide the interceptors.
Yeah.
They're also way cheaper and much more powerful now.
Cheaper sensors, better computers, cheaper launches. So the basic building blocks are more accessible. The article even brings in the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, right, to kind of quantify this shift.
It does, yeah. The CBO, which is, nonpartisan, they estimate, according to The Economist, that the cost for building a satellite constellation just to defeat maybe 1 or 2 ICBMs.
Just 1 or 2.
Okay. Very limited capability. That cost has fallen by maybe 30 to 40% compared to estimates they did back in 2004 and 2012.
So a noticeable drop. It suggests that for at least a small-scale system, the economics look different now.
Definitely. It makes the concept less purely sci-fi than it was.
Okay, so the tech makes the underlying idea more feasible, at least in theory, for some limited uses. But thinking about why this Golden Dome idea might seem relevant now, even if the big claims are maybe exaggerated, The threats we face have changed too since the 80s, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. And what's interesting, the article points out that even the current Biden administration is actually already working on some components that would be, essential for any kind of advanced space-based defense.
Really? Like what kind of things?
Well, the source mentions ongoing work on space-based sensors, specifically ones designed to track tricky targets, like cruise missiles, which fly low and fast.
Harder to see from the ground.
Exactly. And also building the sort of digital plumbing that data pipes needed to share tracking information really quickly between satellites. So these are kind of the foundational elements for seeing and following threats from space.
So some pieces are already being developed, maybe for slightly different reasons, but they fit into this broader picture, and that connects to the changing threats.
Precisely. The article highlights that potential adversaries aren't just thinking about missiles flying over the North Pole anymore, which is what older systems were mostly designed for.
Right.
They're developing missiles that can take more circuitous routes, as the article puts it, basically trying to fly around or under the coverage of existing ground-based radars and interceptors. A view from space could potentially help track those.
Trying to exploit gaps in current defenses? Makes sense. What else has changed in the threat landscape, according to the article?
A really key point the source brings up is that it's not just about nuclear ICBMs anymore. There's a growing worry, the article suggests, about advanced conventional missiles, non-nuclear, but still very destructive.
Okay.
Missiles that could be used to target critical infrastructure, things like ports, air bases, command centers. So defending against those types of attacks presents a different challenge and maybe a different value proposition than just focusing on stopping a massive nuclear strike.
Yeah, that shift from purely nuclear to potentially high-end conventional attacks, that really changes the calculation for missile defense. But okay, let's circle back to the reality check, because the Economist article definitely threw some cold water on those very ambitious claims we mentioned earlier.
It certainly does. The article is pretty blunt, stating that Mr. Trump's claims about the Golden Dome are, and I quote, inevitably exaggerated.
And why exaggerated? According to the source, why can't even a super advanced system provide that close to 100% or, blanket protection?
Well, it really boils down to the sheer scale and complexity involved, especially if you're talking about stopping a large attack from a major power like Russia or China. Plus, the physics are just hard. The article actually cites a specific analysis to illustrate this from the American Physical Society, physicists.
Okay, what did the physicists calculate?
Their estimate, as reported in the article, was that the U.S. would need something like 36,000 interceptors in space.
Wait, say that again, 36,000.
36,000 space-based interceptors. Just have a decent shot at stopping 10 North Korean ICBMs.
10 missiles? Why so many interceptors for just 10? That seems disproportionate.
Well, according to the article, that calculation assumes you only have about 30 seconds to decide and act after detecting the launch. You need enough interceptors positioned in the right orbits to guarantee one can get there in time. It's about coverage and probability.
Okay, geometry and speed.
Exactly. And the article is very clear. If you try to scale that up to counter a much larger attack from Russia or China, or if you try to guarantee protection over all U.S. territory, those numbers just mushroom, as they put it. They grow exponentially.
Right. And if the number of satellites mushrooms, I assume the cost mushrooms right along with it. The article gives the CBO's estimate again, but this time for a system that's way less ambitious than close to 100%, right?
Yes, exactly. For what the CBO considers a modest shield, just designed to maybe stop a couple of ICBMs, not a large attack.
Okay, a minimal system. What's the price tag on that, according to the CBO via The Economist?
Their estimate over a 20-year period is somewhere in the range of $161 billion to $542 billion.
Whoa. Okay, so the official estimate for a basic system starts at $161 billion and could go over $500 billion. Compared to the claim of $175 billion for a near-perfect system built in 2 years. That's quite a gap the article is highlighting.
A massive gap. And The Economist puts that CBO range in perspective, calling it an enormous sum, especially, as the article points out, when you consider the other huge defense costs on the horizon, like modernizing the existing U.S. nuclear forces that's already projected to cost almost $1 trillion, $946 billion, by 2035.
So there's immense pressure on the defense budget already. Building even a partial new shield would be incredibly expensive based on these figures.
That's the picture the source paints.
And didn't the article also mention Mr. Trump's executive order from January? Something about the scope of the defense needed?
Yes, it mentioned the ambition stated in that order was to defend against any foreign aerial attack. And his public announcements included stopping not just ballistic missiles, but also cruise and hypersonic missiles.
So basically stopping everything, which, given the cost and scale numbers we just talked about from the article's analysis, seems like an incredibly high bar.
It certainly suggests a disconnect between that kind of aspiration and what the technical and financial analysis, as presented in the source, indicates is actually feasible.
Okay, which leads us to another really critical point the article raises, the strategic stability issue. And it's a huge if, but if you could somehow build a shield this effective, the Economist argues it would actually be really destabilizing.
Yeah, this is a classic dilemma in nuclear strategy and arms control. The article's argument is basically this. If America's main rivals, like China and Russia, started to believe that a U.S. missile shield could actually work.
Meaning their own nuclear missiles couldn't get through to retaliate.
Exactly. If they feared their nuclear deterrent was being neutralized, they wouldn't just sit back and accept it.
They'd react. How does the article suggest they might react?
The most likely reaction, according to the source, would be for them to build up their offensive forces to compensate, to try and overwhelm the shield.
So build more missiles.
Build more missiles, perhaps develop new types of weapons that are harder to intercept, maybe things that fly faster or are stealthier, giving even less warning time. The article specifically flags China as potentially accelerating its existing nuclear buildup even faster than it already is.
So, paradoxically, trying to build the perfect defense could actually trigger an offensive arms race.
That's the destabilizing spiral the article warns about. And it kind of circles back to that reality checkpoint.
Yeah.
The source concludes that even with a massive effort, some Russian and Chinese nuclear ICBMs would, in reality, always get through. You probably can't achieve that perfect leak-proof shield anyway.
Right. Okay, so it's incredibly expensive, maybe technically impossible at the scale claimed, and it could make the world more dangerous by sparking an arms race. Given all of that, does the Economist article just conclude that any kind of homeland missile defense is pointless? It seems like it pushes back on that a little.
It does offer a bit more nuance there, yeah.
Yeah.
It argues against the idea that if you can't stop everything, then stopping anything is useless. The source suggests that blocking even a, quote, modest share of incoming missiles can still be valuable.
Okay, why is stopping some useful if you can't stop them all? What's the value in partial defense?
The article points to a couple of key potential benefits. First, the obvious one, limiting damage. Fewer missiles hitting means less destruction, fewer casualties. That's inherently valuable.
Makes sense. Any reduction in harm is good. What's the other benefit?
The other one, which is maybe less intuitive but really important, is that it can die some decision-making time for leaders in the middle of a crisis.
Time. The critical resource when things are escalating fast.
Exactly. Think about it. If leaders aren't facing the immediate, terrifying prospect of a completely undefended, devastating attack, even just intercepting a few missiles might provide a few crucial extra seconds or minutes.
Time to think, to get better information, maybe to try and de-escalate before hitting the button.
Precisely. It could potentially prevent a panicked, catastrophic response based on incomplete information. The article actually gives a few real-world examples where this kind of thinking applies.
Which countries does it mention?
It cites Israel, Ukraine, and India as examples of countries that see value in missile defense, even though their systems aren't perfect or impenetrable. The idea is that these systems can lessen the blow and provide that vital decision space.
Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground here based on this Economist article. We went from the Star Wars dreams of the 80s to this resurrected Golden Dome idea.
We looked at how technology has actually made some aspects of space-based defense more feasible, particularly the costs for limited capabilities.
But then we hit that huge gap the article highlights between the really grand claims near perfect protection built fast and cheap and the expert analysis on the immense costs and technical hurdles, especially for large-scale defense.
Right. And the serious strategic risks, the potential for destabilization in arms races, if such a system were perceived as being too effective, even if it isn't in reality.
And finally, the article's more nuanced point, that even imperfect defense might have some value in limiting damage and buying that crucial decision time.
Yeah, it's clear from the source that the reality is way more complex than just, build a shield. The article started with fool's gold or gold standard. It seems the answer, based on their analysis, is probably neither.
Yeah, maybe something in between. It's this old, ambitious idea that's become partially more feasible because of tech. It could be useful against some threats or offer some limited protection.
But according to the analysis in the article, it seems to face enormous cost barriers, maybe insurmountable technical challenges for that close to 100% goal against major powers, and it carries these significant strategic risks if it's oversold or misunderstood.
The article really tries to ground this whole debate in those practical realities and the strategic chessboard rather than just the futuristic tech promises.
Yeah, it definitely does.
So here's something for you, our listeners, to think about after this deep dive, drawing on what we've unpacked from the source. The Economist article suggests that even stopping a few incoming missiles could buy invaluable decision time for leaders in a crisis. How do you weigh that potential benefit, maybe preventing catastrophe, against the staggering costs the article outlines and that serious risk of sparking an arms race it also describes? What do you think is the most significant takeaway from what this deep dive into the source material has revealed?